Hi, good morning, and welcome to this week's webinar, specifically for our members at the ZP Developer Zone. I'm just going to quickly check that it is streaming okay. Yeah, that's great. So every week we do a webinar specifically for the members, and this is this week's webinar. This week I was going to talk about biofuel cells. Now I know that Zimmer and Peacock is all about biosensors, but we have touched upon biofuel cells in one of the previous webinars that we did, and I sort of skipped over at the time because I knew that yeah, we probably have to just focus in on it a little bit. So today we're going to focus a little bit on biofuel cells. But before I go, I just want to kind of give some news for our members. Hi, Hasim. I can see Hasim has joined us. I'll just say hello. Right. So obviously we have the ZP Developer Zone, and it's actually fairly active. We have our Discord server. We have our weekly webinars. We have our collaborations. We have PhDs available. We're having a workshop, and we offer discounts as part of being a member of the ZP Developer Zone. So just a few bits of news. We still have this PhD that's available in Norway. I have noticed, for example, that there's a lot of people graduating in Indonesia at the moment, as an example. So I mean, it'd be great if the news got out that we've got this PhD. If we had this PhD in Norway, if people are interested in it. We do have a public webinar on the 22nd of October at 8 a.m. London time, and that will be focusing on ginger testing. And if you're not a member and you're watching this video later on YouTube, then please, click some links below and you can become a member. So at this moment, Hasim is just offering some promotions in Indonesia where he's testing people's chili for testing three chilies for the price of 2. And also Hasim is talking at the International Conference on Environmental Science and Technology. He's presenting a paper there as well. So if you haven't signed up, maybe take a look at that conference. It might be quite interesting. Just a few more things. Still intend to do the workshop specifically for you guys in Jakarta in 2021. And also, we have been doing some work, and I know I mentioned it last week, on Abril's work. And I'm hoping that Abril might even be presenting this. There's a Biosensors Congress in Korea next year. And hopefully Abril might be able to present on that. So we have a present. So I have some notes for him, and I'll share them with him when I speak to him next. So Abril, as you all know, is one of our members, and that's the point that we do collaborate. We are providing a workshop. We do have funded PhDs, and we are doing these webinars, of course. So when we the reason I'm doing biofuel cells today is because yeah, that's right. Hasim is just saying, guys, several of you who are members of this are actually quite, are not quite, you are senior guys at university. So have a look out. It might be nice to send one of your best students to us to do this PhD with. So please have a look out for really good candidates. Hasim knows us. He's been to the facility. I think, even since Hasim has seen us, it's probably doubled in staff and doubled in size. We've taken over an extra floor in the building at ZP in Norway, and we've also taken on an extra building. So it's definitely grown. Now, when we were doing a webinar several weeks ago, we did on halal sensors, and I thought it was a very interesting topic. And what I thought was very interesting at the time was actually that one of the leading groups on this was in Indonesia, and they had actually had a sensor for alcohol. Now, when I read behind what they were doing, the sort of science behind what they were doing, they would have this meter, and they would put this meter into the alcohol solution, and they would be able to detect alcohol. And then when I read a little bit bit deeper into this, I realized it was a biofuel cell. And so, first of all, I'll just describe what they were doing. So they were using the biofuel cell as a sensor for alcohol, but what was actually happening was they would have alcohol, so C2H5OH, so we have alcohol, and it's reacting to form potentially carbon dioxide. That's but at least the alcohol would be oxidizing, and the air in the liquid or in the water was being reduced to water. So they literally, rather than just sensing the alcohol, they were actually using the alcohol as a fuel. Fuel was giving them an energy or electricity, and they were measuring that. So they were using what was a biofuel cell at the time. But I thought, well, I didn't cover it at the time, but I wanted to go back now and say, when we were discussing the alcohol sensor for halal several weeks ago, they were actually using a biofuel cell. So now we're going to go a little bit deeper in on this. So the first question is, what is a biofuel cell? First of all, what is a fuel cell? And a fuel cell is an electrochemical cell where you pump in or pass in a fuel. So for in this example, we're pumping in hydrogen, and hydrogen, if you pump, as you know, hydrogen wants to react with oxygen. So if you put hydrogen and oxygen together in a container and just put a light in there, it'll pop, depending on the scale. So it's a very fast, rapid reaction. So there's definitely an energetic or thermodynamic positive reaction between hydrogen and oxygen. These two things want to react together. When a fuel cell, what you do is you bring both things into the fuel cell, the hydrogen and the oxygen. You don't let them just contact each other. They're actually separated by the electrolyte. And the hydrogen gives up its electrons to become protons, and the oxygen, which is on the other side of the electrolyte, says, okay, well, I'll have those electrons and I'll become something like water, because hydrogen likes to oxidize and water likes to be reduced. So they do react well together, but you separate those reactions in a biofuel cell so that the electrons go through a circuit. And because you've separated the two reactions, the electrons have to go through the circuit, and that gives you useful work. So a fuel cell, rather than letting two, let's say, molecules like hydrogen and oxygen just react together and give you an exothermic reaction and lots of heat very quickly, no, you control it. You separate the two reactants. They both are still reacting with each other, but almost at a distance. And the electrons, rather than directly transferring from hydrogen onto oxygen and just becoming water, no, they're transferring electrons between each other, but through an external cell. And that is the source of power. And it gives you a voltage and it gives you a current, and power is equal to voltage times current. So that's a fuel cell. Now, a biofuel cell is the similar thing, but now, rather than feeding or pumping in hydrogen, you can pass in something like alcohol or maybe glucose. So now it's converting alcohol, for example, and the electrons are going through the circuit and giving us a voltage and current, or it's glucose, and you're potentially even using glucose oxidase. So the electrons again go through the circuit. So a fuel cell is the overall arching technology, but underneath fuel cells, you have biofuel cells, where we're starting to use enzymes to help convert some molecules like glucose and alcohol. You're oxidizing those molecules using the enzyme, and the electron then is forced to go through this external circuit and give you work. Now, I want to just compare and kind of contrast that. At Zimmer people, we're very interested in biosensors, and we often discuss glucose sensors, where you have glucose immobilized on the electrode. You have glucose oxidase immobilized on the electrode. The glucose comes along. There's a reaction. We get the generation of hydrogen peroxide. And because we're applying a voltage, the hydrogen peroxide is oxidized and we get electrons. So we're working in a sensor mode. The biofuel cell is actually really similar. The glucose comes along, it reacts with the enzyme, and we get electrons. but they're trying to do slightly different things. Whereas in the sensor, I'm trying to sense. In the biofuel cell, they actually want the electrons to go and do some work. They want the electricity. So what they're trying to achieve is slightly different. Whereas I want to sense the glucose for them is a fuel. But you can actually think, if I've got enzymes in there, a biofuel cell, another application for it is actually a biosensor. And just to go back to this a couple of slides up, and again, this is what the guys in Indonesia are doing with that halal sensor. They could have done this using electrochemical sensors, the way that we describe often in our lectures, but they didn't. They set this sensor up as a biofuel cell. So they had alcohol, which was reacting on one of their electrodes and giving them electrons. And then on the other electrode, they had probably the air or the dissolved oxygen in the solution was being reduced. The oxygen was being reduced down to water. So they were running as a biofuel cell, even though they were using it as a sensor. And I think there's a sort of similarity between, as I say, glucose sensors and maybe biofuel cells that use alcohol. The similarities are they're both electrochemical, they both use electrodes, except the difference is the real intention of a biofuel cell is to give you energy, and the real intention of a glucose sensor is to give you is to detect the glucose itself. So their intentions are slightly different, but there's a lot of similarities also between the technology. It's a small matter, but a biofuel cell works in the microwatts. So it gives you power, milliwatts, MW, it gives you milliwatts. So it gives you power, but it gives you milliwatts of power. A glucose sensor also actually can generate power, but it's in the microwatts. So that's 10 to the minus 6 watts, and the biofuel cell works. The biofuel cell works in the milliwatt range, 10 to the minus 3 watts. What I'm going to just on my next slide. So some of the principles that we use to make a glucose sensor, where we take an electrode and we pipette an enzyme formulation down onto an electrode. It's really similar to how you can make a biofuel cell. Now, in a biofuel cell, they have an electrode and an electrode, and they separate them by an electrolyte between these two things. And they try to make the area as big as possible, and they try to make the gap as small as possible. They want a big area because the bigger the area, the more current they can produce. And they want to make the gap as small as possible so that they don't get a high resistance, so they get the best voltage out of the cell. So in a glucose sensor, we don't really mind about the sort of area of electrode too much and the separation between the two electrodes. We don't mind as much. In a biofuel cell, they want a big area and they want a small gap because they want high current and they want low resistances because they want to get a lot of voltage out of it. So their configuration is different. Now, what I want to do is, I realize that every week we talk about glucose sensors being like, the sort of the grandfather of all biosensing. And just because of a particular program I have on at the moment, I happen to have a glucose sensor with me this week. And so I thought, just a sort of slight demo. Now, I know that many of you are probably familiar with glucose sensors. Unfortunately, if you're diabetic or you have diabetics in the family, you're probably familiar with these. But I mean, this came through. This arrived this week. This glucose sensor. I mean, I've got to admire it because it's a very generic brand, but it is pretty small. I mean, the glucose strips. They're also, when you look at these, see how small these glucose strips are. And the reason they're that size is because they want to make the manufacturing of these as efficient and cost-effective as possible. So they're basically trying to maximize or minimize their use of materials in these sensors. So there's a nice feature, obviously, that the glucose sensor turns on when I put the strip in there. So there's no actually turning on of the meter. what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get the lancer. So these lancers are just what I've just done is I've just set the spring, and so when I hit the button, it then so what the lancer is going to do is I'm just going to grab some blood. So I hope you're not too squeamish. It won't be that hard. So what I'll do is I'll just take the lancer. Right. So now it just forms a pretty blurry, but it's just forming a little drop of blood. The really beautiful thing now about the modern glucose sensors are they only need about 300 nanoliters of blood. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to get the insufficient blood. Yeah, now it's doing a countdown. Yeah, so it's actually read my blood glucose as 7.8 millimolar, which is actually a little bit high, but I actually had my breakfast at 7. I had my breakfast about an hour ago, so I might be still high from my breakfast. So I just wanted to kind of show you that because we do talk about glucose sensors and biosensors and every week. Hi, Seppi, nice to see you. So we do talk about it every week, but I just wanted to kind of give you a quick demonstration of one. And the nice thing about that one is it's Bluetooth, so it's actually connected straight to my phone. And so now I can actually see the result immediately on my phone. So I know we're talking about biofuel cells this week, but I just feel like every week I do mention glucose sensors. And I thought, all right, well, let's just do a quick demonstration. Let's just do a quick demonstration on a glucose sensor. So Seppi's here and Sarif is here. So it's nice to see you guys, and thank you for attending this week. So I just wanted to say that glucose sensors are fairly easy to make, and in theory, biofuel cells are fairly easy to make. Now, the original idea of biofuel cells was that they were actually going to be like a power source for medical devices. So if you read the literature, the idea was people were going to put biofuel cells into the body, and they were going to use them to power things like pacemakers, or maybe even use them to power glucose sensors for diabetics. Now, it's very challenging to put anything into the body. You've got to, it's scientifically and engineering challenging, and it's ethically challenging. You know, you've got to justify what you're about to do, and you've got to get a regulatory approval on this. But if you try to make a technology that's going to be inside the body, it's a really big challenge, and you've really got to think about investment of something like $20 million US. So you have all these academic papers where they're going to make biofuel cells and they're going to be powering all these devices. But the reality is it takes a lot of effort and a big team and a lot of money to really do this. So the original idea is that biofuel cells will be in or on the body, and they would be powering devices. I did mention earlier on that biofuel cells at best are probably in the milliwatt region. So it's really unlikely that they can actually generate enough power to really do anything particularly useful in the body. So that was the original idea of biofuel cells. Now, actually, you know, the reality of biofuel cells is that I don't think they'll be implantable devices. I think the future for biofuel cells is actually as low cost or lower cost, literally batteries or fuel cells for powering devices. So this is a company that's launched in France. This is their founder, Jules Hammond. The company's called BeFC, Bioenzymatic Fuel Cells. And he's holding up one of their fuel cells here. And they're effectively making biofuel cells using low-cost manufacturing. They're making them very small. And you know, they're using glucose as the fuel, and then oxygen, which is everywhere within our environment, as the other fuel. So glucose and oxygen do actually want to react together, but it takes a very long time, and it often takes a catalyst. The catalyst they're using is the enzymes. So it's like a glucose sensor. And then they've also got another enzyme to help reduce the oxygen. They have glucose plus oxygen, giving them glucolactone plus water, but they're making the electrons go through a circuit and give them useful power. So the future for biofuel cells for me was not the original intention of implanting sensors into people and powering devices. I think now actually biofuel cells, they could make for a very low cost an environmentally friendly and biodegradable battery. Now, if you think about fuel cell, if you think about it, a lithium polymer battery, we're always told there's a shortage of lithium in the world. People are using these kind of batteries once and then discarding them. So there's a problem with the disposal of them. So if this company can actually develop a biodegradable, low-cost fuel cell that runs off glucose, then it will be a very nice device. Now, what they see, last week we talked about the Internet of Things, and I said, biosensors will be everywhere in our environment, or everywhere in our manufacturing, or everywhere in our universities, monitoring something biological, chemical, and sending the data to the internet. That's the Internet of Things. Now, what BeFC is saying they believe in the Internet of Things as well. And so off their website, they're talking about RFID, which is a way of transmitting data, NFC, which is another way of transmitting data, Bluetooth, which is another way of transmitting data, Zigbee, Wi-Fi, Sigfox, LoRaWAN. These are all ways of transmitting data. So what they're saying on their website is the biofuel cell has a future, but it's probably actually to power the Internet of Things. So at Zimmer & Pugott, we're very interested in biosensors because we want to monitor things. And this company actually is using very similar technology, but for actually producing the power in order to power the Internet of Things. So it's kind of it's interesting that we're working on one side and they're working on the other side. We're producing the signal and they're trying to produce the power in order that we can gather that signal. So I just thought that they were an interesting company because they, correctly so, they believe in biofuel cells, but they don't necessarily believe in them necessarily as implantable devices. They actually see them as a power source for the Internet of Things. And I kind of agree with them. So I'm just going to summarize now because I can see that it's 8:25, and I know that a few of you who listen every week have meetings next, so I can't run over. But so fuel cells, so if you hear this term fuel cells, they are ways of converting fuel, often hydrogen and oxygen, into electricity. So that's what fuel cells have been in development for over 30 years, really as power sources. Now, the idea of biofuel cells was rather than using hydrogen, for example, as one of the fuels, could we rather use something like alcohol and glucose? And so the biofuel cell came in because in order to use glucose or alcohol, you need biological molecules in there or enzymes in there. So the biofuel cell is a sort of derivative of the fuel cell. And so when we looked at the halal sensor, as I said at the beginning of this presentation from Indonesia, they were testing alcohol, and they were actually using the alcohol as effective as a source of energy, and they were getting electricity, and they were then giving you a result due to the generation of that electricity. So they were actually using an alcohol biofuel cell. Now, the primary use of biofuel cells is as a power source. So even though the guys in Indonesia or the halal sense were using it for sensing, I think most academics and probably most businesses are actually using biofuel cells as they see it as a power supply rather than a biosensor. But I do like biofuel cells as potential power source when talking about the Internet of Things, because they should be quite easy to manufacture. I did do that little demonstration earlier on of these glucose sensors. So you should be able to make them in the same way that you make these kind of sensors. So there is a low-cost manufacturing technology behind biofuel cells. If they use the correct types of materials, then they should be biodegradable. And so low cost and biodegradable seems like a really good fit for the Internet of Things. So I just want to, I am going to just wrap up now, but I just want to say, just to remind you all that we have the Discord server, we have the webinars every week, we have collaborations. Abril is definitely collaborating with us. We do have this PhD, so as Haseem says, if you've got people who are recently graduating looking for their next opportunity, we do have PhDs. We are doing a workshop in Jakarta next year, and of course there's a discount by being a membership. And if anyone's interested in the PhD, get them to Google Zimmer and Peacock fully funded PhD, and there is a PhD out there at the moment. All right. So Haseem and the guys, thank you for attending this week. I'll put the notes on the Discord server, and I will also put a link to a YouTube video that we do afterwards. So yeah, any questions, give me a shout. I'm also looking, if you want me to talk about something specific next week, let me know. I'd be happy to do it. On the 22nd of October, we're having a large webinar where we'll do live demonstrations on ginger. And I want the guys to look at ginger powder and ginger root. So that might be kind of interesting to you. Okay, all right. Well, I appreciate it, Haseem and guys. And I shall hopefully speak to you. I'll be on the Discord server in a minute anyway, and speak to you guys soon. Yeah, cool. As Haseem says, we're finishing up now, but any chat, give me a shout on the Discord server. And I'm interested in collaboration, so you guys let me know if you've got things you want us to work on together. All right, cheers and thanks, Haseem.